I finally watched the Snyder Cut, and it's pretty good. After the trash that was Justice League, I had started to lose hope on the DC universe. Sure, I still saw Shazam and Aquaman, and they were fun, but not great. Then Birds of Prey and Wonder Woman 84 came out, which really disappointed me. So when they announced that Zack would be getting a chance to finish his version of the movie, I was somewhat interested, but not that excited. Every trailer since then that I've seen has mostly been meh, and learning the fact that it's largely still the same story didn't help either. In all honesty, I was just expecting some great visuals and action sequences to take most of the screen time, and maybe some character moments. What I got was less action and more character. Each character felt needed and important and well realized. Cyborg in particular got a fully fleshed out character arc, which was significantly more satisfying than I had expected. His origin in the movie was better executed than several action superhero origin movies. Every character had their own personality and didn't break it for an unnecessary joke or a cheesy one-liner.
Booyah.
The serious nature of Cyborg and Batman's character were kept intact and consistent throughout the movie. In the old version, the jokes just didn't know when to stop.
Like brunch. Like, what is brunch?
Speaking of jokes, this movie was more lighthearted than I expected. Flash, being the funniest, delivers the most jokes, but unlike in the theatrical cut, it doesn't come off as silly or childishly awkward to me.
What do you think, man? You think she'd ever go for a younger guy?
She's 5,000 years old, Barry. Every guy's a younger guy.
Also, as it turns out, it wasn't just the characters that were ruined in the theatrical version, but even the jokes. The jokes in this had more context behind them as well, like when Superman brings Lois to the farm. In the theatrical cut, she says,
"You smell good."
and you can just tell it's forced. But in this version, she says,
"You smell."
Did I not before?
The joke works because in this version, that's the first time he said anything since his return from the dead. Superman in this version doesn't speak during his fight with the League, even when he sees Batman. And that's not even the only line that gets that kind of treatment. Later in the movie, we have Cyborg saying,
Right ain't over yet. My man.
but in this version, he says,
You're welcome.
which makes more sense for his personality. Also, due to the variety in characters and their individual personalities, the interactions they have are really well done. Like with Diana and Alfred, when she's trying to make tea and Alfred, being the British butler, is trying to educate her. Or with Flash and Aquaman, when they discuss about whether it's right to ask so much from Cyborg since he just saw his father die. Or Aquaman and Wonder Woman, who discuss about the past history of their kind. Most of the dialogues fit the scenes and the characters. The little conversations they have, and especially when they discuss their plans, are really well written. My favorite is when they discuss the abilities of a mother box and use analogy of a burning house.
Burn down a house, particles still exist. Particles of house become particles of smoke.
Anybody with a match can turn a house to smoke.
Put them in the box. Turn smoke back into a house.
That's one of the best ways to deliver exposition, in my opinion. It's easy to understand, and it's a pretty good analogy. The score in this movie, however, was a mixed bag for me. It's still way better than in the theatrical cut, but that's not really a high bar to clear to begin with. There were moments when it was brilliant, like when Flash travels through time at the end, or when we get a montage with Cyborg during his origin story, especially the part where he helps a single mother from becoming homeless. The smile he has while he stands on the rain, that scene is beautiful. But there were also times when it was just annoying, like early in the movie when the Amazonians are fighting Steppenwolf. The chorus that plays in the background just didn't work for me. It felt too melodramatic and a little silly, as if it's a parody, and as a whole, however, the movie had decent score. It's not as great as in Man of Steel or BVS, or even that consistent, but still good enough for a superhero movie at least. Now let's talk about the villains. Let's start with the main one. Steppenwolf was a massive improvement here. He went from being one of the worst comic book villains of all time to a pretty good one. He's still not as good as someone like Thanos or Zod, or Joker or Bane, but he's still good enough and has a motivation that makes sense. He's not trying to destroy the world for the sake of it. He's trying to redeem himself for Darkseid. All he wants is to be accepted by him and to serve him, to be appreciated, to the point when he was killed, I felt kinda bad for him, which is something I never thought I would say regarding Steppenwolf. Also, props to the actor playing him in the movie. All we hear is his voice, but he did a fantastic job here. You can just feel the emotions in his voice, when he's sad, when he's afraid, especially when he's begging for forgiveness, when he's talking to Desad. That moment you can tell that the voice actor really put some effort there. As for Darkseid, this was the part when I felt kinda mixed. I was hoping to see him fight the Justice League, but that didn't happen, although I wasn't that disappointed by them not fighting either, as Steppenwolf was quite a badass. Also, Steppenwolf's death has to be one of the most badass supervillain deaths ever. However, I was underwhelmed when Superman came and beat him almost single-handedly. Granted, he is Superman and really powerful. I just hoped he would still be able to land at least one punch or two himself. Alas, at least he went out great. The way Darkseid puts his foot on Steppenwolf's decapitated head was so cool. It almost made me forget that Darkseid in this movie is basically just a cameo. Speaking of cameos, the Joker and Martian Manhunter make cameos as well. Joker was there at the very end and just for a while, but the conversation he had with Batman was awesome. The way he taunted Batman, especially when he said,
Like, why you sent a boy wonder?
To do a man's job.
that scene redeemed Jared Leto's Joker for me. Although I must add that I'm still not a fan of his laugh. It felt weak. Maybe he's laughing like that so Superman doesn't hear him or something. Either way, I'm just glad that we finally got to see these versions of these characters in a single scene. Ben Affleck's Batman and Jared Leto's Joker having a conversation. That is some real good fan service. Now I'm not really a comic book guy, so the Martian Manhunter cameo didn't mean much to me. But I'm still glad it's there. I'm glad that they found a way to include his characters. Also now it makes sense to me as to why the General from Man of Steel was so interested in Superman. He even tries to track him by the end of that movie. And since he was already interested in Superman, it made sense as to why he wanted to help Lois as well. We also get to see the characters mourn Superman's death properly this time, especially Lois and Martha. From a writing perspective, Lois visiting Superman's monument with coffee was a great move. This way she was there to help organically and it was foreshadowed from the beginning. And although Lois and Clark don't have much screen time together, their chemistry in this movie was much better than in both Justice League and Dawn of Justice combined. This also made the reunion between Martha and Clark more satisfying. Surprisingly enough, the parts of the movie that I was most looking forward to was also the least interesting to me. I'm talking about the action. Now visually the movie looks good, but there were some scenes where the CGI was distracting me bad. Like here, it's still that those fingers are on a green screen. It looks so bad it's almost like a YouTuber made it. Also, it took me a while to get to the aspect ratio. Those massive black bars on the side kept distracting me, but not as much as the scenes that made into the theatrical cut. Those were the most distracting. Whenever I saw a scene that I've already seen in the theatrical version, it just distracted me. I was pulled out of the movie over and over for the first hour. Now the action is good, but not great. I for one was expecting far more violence for an R-rated movie. Still, I enjoyed Steppenwolf slaughtering Atlanteans and all that, and I also enjoyed seeing some blood when Darkseid chopped Green Lantern's hand off. I mean, it did deliver that R-rated goodness in some scenes, but most of the time it didn't feel like watching an R-rated movie like Logan or Watchmen. Sadly, most of the highlights of these action sequences already made into the theatrical version, so I wasn't really that surprised from the action for the most part, all except the occasional fatalities either by Steppenwolf or to Steppenwolf, and especially when Flash reverses time to save everyone in the climax. That scene was brilliant. I'm so glad that we finally have a great Flash slow-mo moment for the big screen of your house. In Days of Future Past and Apocalypse, Quicksilver scenes were so creative and awesome to look at. And while they're still the gold standard in my opinion, the Flash moment at the end of this movie is definitely not too far away. Now, as you can tell, I've been mostly positive about this movie, but it doesn't mean it's a flawless masterpiece. It does have its problem, like Wonder Woman for example. Even though she's quite the badass here, compared to the theatrical and the 84 movie, she somehow still comes off as a girl hung up on her ex. Granted, there were like only 2 scenes, maybe 3, where she mentions her past relationship, but it felt off. It's been like decades. Can't she just move on? Also, it didn't help the fact that Wonder Woman 84 has made Wonder Woman a far less interesting character than ever. And I have to admit that one of the main reasons I enjoyed this movie so much is because I kept comparing it to the older theatrical version. If I was comparing it to something like Days of Future Past, or The Dark Knight, or Infinity War, I would not be praising this movie as much as I am. Compared to the actual greats, this movie is still good, but not as good. Other than Wonder Woman, the other major character that I found lackluster was Aquaman. Despite being somewhat improved in this version, he still didn't make that much of an impact on me. He had some good moments and interactions, especially here where he points at Flash, but overall I found him to be pretty forgettable. As a matter of fact, I was more intrigued by Mera. I found her more interesting here than in Aquaman movie, despite significantly less screen time. Not saying she was bad there, but in here she was an even bigger badass, in my opinion. Especially when she uses her powers and sucks the blood out of Steppenwolf's head. It was brutal and cool enough to be in a Mortal Kombat movie. And even when in the nightmare scene, she was ready to fight Superman. That scene was cool. Other than that, Batman doesn't make awkward jokes and Superman doesn't have a baby mouth. So those scenes alone are enough for me to like these characters better. Batman and Superman, for not having those awkward and cringy moments, are better by default. So overall, I enjoyed it, and while it's not the greatest comic book movie of all time by a long shot, it's definitely one of the best in my books. Despite the long 4-hour runtime, which I don't think it needed to be, 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours. Anyway, despite the long runtime, I know for a fact I'll be rewatching this movie several times in the near future, especially since I have a versus video on mine, which should be out in a couple of weeks. I hope we get to see a proper sequel sometime in the future. For now, I give it an 8 out of 10. If this ends up being the last DC movie Zack made, at least he went out with a bang with Justice League. Thank you for watching, everyone. If you like this video, please like and subscribe for more. I'll be reviewing WandaVision next. So if you want to know my thoughts on that show, well, subscribe.